According to footage released by Hezbollah-affiliated media, a high-intensity strike unfolded in less than 3 minutes, during which more than 20 projectiles were launched toward Israeli military positions in the northern front. The attack reportedly targeted an Israeli Defense Forces facility located near the Golan Heights, a highly sensitive area that has remained under constant military alert in recent months. Military analysts noted that the speed and density of the assault marked a significant departure from previous patterns, suggesting a shift toward coordinated, high-frequency strike tactics rather than isolated rocket fire. Within this extremely short window of time, at least 3 separate targets inside or near the facility were reportedly hit, triggering large fires and thick columns of black smoke rising from the site. Video clips circulating online appear to show rapid successive impacts, with little visible response time between each strike, raising questions about the effectiveness of real-time interception under such conditions. Hezbollah sources claim that the operation involved the use of jet-powered unmanned aerial systems combined with guided munitions, indicating a possible upgrade in both speed and targeting precision. If confirmed, this would represent a notable evolution in the group's operational capabilities, particularly in its ability to overwhelm layered defense systems through saturation tactics. Meanwhile, Israeli defense officials have not publicly confirmed the extent of the damage but acknowledged an increase in attacks across the northern sector over the past 48 hours. In parallel, reports from the region indicate that multiple waves of rocket fire were launched not only toward military installations but also toward surrounding areas, triggering air raid sirens across parts of northern Israel. Residents in border cities were forced to take shelter as the incoming fire continued in short intervals, placing additional strain on existing defense systems. Security experts warn that the use of staggered attack waves firing, pausing briefly, and then resuming could be designed specifically to push interception systems into a state of overload. At the same time, the incident appears to signal a broader escalation, as clashes are no longer limited to long-range exchanges but are increasingly involving coordinated multi-domain operations. On the ground, reports have emerged suggesting that Israeli military vehicles were also engaged in direct confrontations, with several units reportedly damaged during recent encounters. In response, Israeli forces have begun deploying special operations units deeper into southern Lebanon, targeting locations believed to be strategic strongholds of Hezbollah. Airstrikes have intensified, with dozens of sites reportedly hit within a short period, including suspected weapons depots and command centers. Despite these countermeasures, the pace of incoming attacks has not slowed, indicating that both sides may be entering a new phase of sustained, high-tempo confrontation. At the diplomatic level, unconfirmed reports have surfaced about possible communication channels being explored between Israel and Lebanon, although officials from Beirut have denied any formal negotiations. Meanwhile, Hezbollah has publicly rejected the idea of any agreement that excludes its participation, further complicating efforts to reduce tensions. As the situation continues to evolve, the question remains: is this rapid, high-density strike merely a tactical experiment, or does it signal the beginning of a new form of warfare that could reshape the balance of power in the region? Welcome to our channel, where we break down the most critical developments shaping global security and geopolitical dynamics. The latest escalation along the Israel-Lebanon border is not an isolated incident, but part of a broader and increasingly complex confrontation that has been intensifying over time. For months, the Northern Front has remained one of the most volatile flashpoints in the Middle East, where even minor incidents carry the potential to trigger wider instability. What makes the recent strike particularly significant is not only the scale of firepower involved, but the method by which it was delivered. The use of rapid, high-density attack waves suggests a deliberate attempt to test and possibly exploit the limits of Israel's multi-layered defense systems. This comes at a time when regional tensions are already elevated, with overlapping conflicts, shifting alliances, and growing uncertainty across multiple fronts. Hezbollah, which has long maintained a significant presence in southern Lebanon, appears to be adapting its tactics in response to evolving battlefield conditions. Rather than relying solely on traditional rocket barrages, the group is increasingly integrating new technologies into its operations. This shift raises important questions about the future of asymmetric warfare in the region. Is the battlefield moving toward a model where speed and frequency matter more than sheer destructive power? And if so, how prepared are existing defense systems to handle this transformation? At the same time, Israel continues to view Hezbollah not just as a localized threat, but as part of a broader network of forces aligned with Iran. This perspective has shaped its military strategy, which focuses not only on immediate retaliation but also on long-term containment. Recent developments suggest that both sides are no longer merely signaling deterrence, but actively probing each other's operational limits. This dynamic increases the risk of miscalculation, where a single incident could rapidly escalate beyond control. Meanwhile, the involvement of external actors adds another layer of complexity. The United States, which has strategic interests in the region, is closely monitoring the situation while simultaneously engaging in diplomatic efforts to prevent further escalation. However, each move on the ground can influence the diplomatic landscape, making it increasingly difficult to separate military actions from political consequences. In this context, even a short, high-intensity attack lasting just a few minutes can carry implications far beyond its immediate impact. It can reshape perceptions, alter strategic calculations, and potentially redefine the rules of engagement. The key question now is whether this incident represents a temporary spike in violence or the early sign of a structural shift in how conflicts are fought in this region. The sequence of events appears to have unfolded in a tightly coordinated timeline, with each phase of the attack executed in rapid succession. According to the released footage, the initial wave began with a sudden burst of projectiles directed toward a military installation identified as an IDF site near the Golan Heights. Within seconds, multiple impacts were recorded, suggesting that the targets had been pre-selected and locked in advance rather than engaged in real time. Observers noted that the strikes did not occur randomly but followed a deliberate pattern, with intervals short enough to prevent any meaningful recovery or repositioning between impacts. In less than 3 minutes, more than 20 projectiles had already been launched, creating a sustained barrage rather than a single overwhelming strike. At least 3 distinct locations within the targeted zone were reportedly hit during this initial phase, each impact generating visible fire and heavy smoke. Video frames show flames spreading rapidly across structures, indicating either the presence of flammable materials or the precision of impact points. Meanwhile, the second phase of the operation appeared to involve a continuation rather than a pause. Instead of ending the assault after the first wave, additional projectiles were launched shortly after, maintaining pressure on the same general area. Security analysts suggest that this staggered approach strike, brief pause, then strike again was likely designed to exploit the response cycle of defensive systems. As one regional defense expert noted, when the interval between waves is carefully calculated, interception systems are forced into continuous engagement without recovery time. This pattern places significant strain on radar tracking, interceptor allocation, and command decision cycles. At the same time, reports indicate that unmanned aerial systems may have been deployed in coordination with the rocket fire. These systems, described by sources as jet-powered drones, are believed to have higher speed and lower reaction windows compared to conventional UAVs. If used in parallel with guided munitions, such platforms could complicate detection and interception efforts, especially when deployed alongside multiple incoming projectiles. On the ground, the immediate impact was described as chaotic. Thick smoke columns were seen rising from the targeted area, while fires continued to burn across multiple points within the installation. Although official casualty figures were not immediately released, the visual evidence suggested significant disruption to the facility's operational capacity. At the same time, sirens were activated across nearby regions, indicating that the attack was not limited to a single location. Additional rocket launches were reported targeting areas across northern Israel, including border cities that were placed under emergency alert. Residents in these areas were seen rushing into shelters as incoming projectiles were detected in successive waves. While some interceptions were reported, not all incoming threats were neutralized before impact. As a result, several projectiles reportedly landed in open areas, leaving behind craters and reinforcing the psychological pressure on local populations. Shortly afterward, a secondary wave of approximately 10 additional rockets was launched toward western Galilee. This follow-up strike occurred with minimal delay, further reinforcing the pattern of sustained, multi-phase engagement. Military observers emphasized that the objective may not have been total destruction, but rather the continuous disruption of defensive operations. Simultaneously, signs of broader escalation began to emerge. Hezbollah sources indicated that the operation was part of a larger campaign involving coordinated strikes across multiple locations in both northern Israel and southern Lebanon. Within a 4-8 hour window, multiple attack cycles were reportedly initiated, creating persistent pressure across the entire front. In parallel, ground-level confrontations were also reported. According to available information, at least 6 Israeli military vehicles were engaged and damaged during direct encounters. These developments suggest that the conflict is no longer confined to long-range exchanges, but is expanding into more direct and complex engagements. In response, Israeli forces moved quickly to initiate counter-operations. Specialized units were deployed deeper into southern Lebanon, targeting areas identified as key operational zones for Hezbollah. Airstrikes intensified, with dozens of targets reportedly struck within a short time frame. These included suspected weapons storage sites, logistical hubs, and command structures. Despite these efforts, incoming attacks did not cease. Instead, the pattern of pressure appeared to continue, indicating that both sides were actively testing each other's resilience and response thresholds. As one Israeli security source reportedly stated, this is no longer about isolated incidents. It is a continuous cycle of action and reaction. To understand why a 3-minute, high-density strike carries such weight, it is necessary to look beyond the immediate battlefield and into the long-standing dynamics that have shaped this confrontation. The northern front between Israel and Lebanon has never been a static line, but rather a constantly shifting zone of tension influenced by decades of conflict, deterrence, and recalibration. Hezbollah's presence in southern Lebanon dates back many years, evolving from a localized force into a structured organization with both military and political dimensions. Over time, its operational approach has adapted in response to changes in Israeli military doctrine, particularly the emphasis on precision strikes and layered defense systems. For years, Israel has invested heavily in defensive infrastructure designed to intercept incoming threats, including multi-tiered systems capable of engaging rockets, missiles, and aerial targets. This framework was built on the assumption that incoming attacks would follow certain patterns, either mass volleys or isolated launches. However, the latest developments suggest a possible shift away from those predictable models. Instead of relying solely on volume or power, the emerging approach appears to emphasize timing, sequencing, and coordination. This is where the concept of saturation evolves into something more complex, not just overwhelming the system with numbers, but disrupting its operational rhythm. By introducing short intervals between waves, attackers can force defensive systems into a continuous state of engagement, reducing efficiency over time. Such tactics reflect a deeper level of adaptation, indicating that lessons from previous confrontations have been studied and integrated into new operational methods. At the same time, the broader regional context cannot be ignored. Hezbollah is widely viewed by Israel as part of a network of aligned forces that extend beyond Lebanon, particularly in relation to Iran. This perception has shaped Israel's strategic outlook, leading to a doctrine that seeks not only to respond to immediate threats but also to contain long-term capabilities. In this framework, any advancement in Hezbollah's tactical execution is interpreted within a larger security equation. It is not just about a single strike or a single location, but about the potential for these methods to be replicated, scaled, and integrated into future operations. Meanwhile, the evolution of unmanned systems has added another layer of complexity. Drones, especially those with enhanced speed and maneuverability, have become a central feature of modern asymmetric warfare. Their relatively low cost, combined with increasing precision, allows them to be deployed in ways that challenge traditional defense mechanisms. When integrated with other forms of attack, such as guided rockets, they create a multidimensional threat environment. This convergence of technologies reflects a broader trend seen across multiple conflict zones, where adaptability and innovation often play a decisive role. In this context, the recent strike can be seen not only as an isolated tactical event but as part of a continuous process of testing, learning, and recalibrating. Each engagement provides data on response times, interception rates, and system vulnerabilities. These insights can then be used to refine future operations, creating an ongoing cycle of adaptation on both sides. At the same time, Israel's response strategy has also evolved. Rather than relying exclusively on large-scale operations, there has been a gradual shift toward more targeted actions aimed at specific nodes within the opposing structure. This includes strikes on logistics, command centers, and infrastructure believed to support operational capabilities. The objective is not only to neutralize immediate threats but also to disrupt the underlying systems that enable sustained activity. However, this approach also carries risks. As both sides increase the precision and frequency of their actions, the margin for error becomes smaller. Misinterpretations, miscalculations, or unintended escalation can occur more rapidly in such an environment. This is particularly relevant in a region where multiple actors operate simultaneously, each with their own strategic priorities. In this layered and interconnected context, even a brief but intense exchange can have implications that extend far beyond its duration. The question is no longer just who initiated the strike, but how each side interprets its meaning and what actions follow as a result. The effectiveness of the recent attack cannot be fully understood without examining the technical dynamics behind modern air defense systems and how they are designed to operate under pressure. At the core of Israel's northern defense architecture is a layered interception model, built to detect, track, and neutralize incoming threats across different ranges and altitudes. Under normal conditions, these systems rely on a sequence of processes: early detection, trajectory, calculation, threat prioritization, and interceptor deployment. Each step requires time, coordination, and computational resources, even if these actions occur within seconds. However, the attack pattern observed in this case appears to have targeted not the strength of the system, but its timing. By launching more than 20 projectiles within a 3-minute window and spacing them in rapid intervals, the attacking side created a continuous stream of incoming targets. This forced the defense system into a state of sustained engagement, where decisions had to be made repeatedly without pause. In such conditions, the challenge is no longer just interception accuracy, but resource management. Each incoming object must be evaluated whether it poses a direct threat or can be ignored if it is projected to land in an uninhabited area. This filtering process becomes significantly more complex when multiple objects arrive simultaneously or in quick succession. Moreover, interceptor missiles are not unlimited. They must be allocated carefully, ensuring that high-priority threats are engaged while conserving resources for potential follow-up waves. The introduction of staggered attack waves complicates this balance. Instead of allowing the system to reset after a single barrage, the short pauses between waves create a cycle where the system remains continuously active. As a result, operators and automated systems are forced to maintain peak performance over an extended period without recovery. This increases the likelihood of delayed responses, suboptimal allocation, or missed interceptions. At the same time, the possible use of jet-powered drones introduces an additional layer of difficulty. Compared to conventional unmanned systems, these platforms are believed to operate at higher speeds, reducing the available reaction window for detection and engagement. When combined with rockets or guided munitions, they create a mixed-threat environment where targets differ in speed, trajectory, and signature. This diversity complicates tracking and prioritization, especially when multiple objects are inbound simultaneously. From a systems perspective, this is not merely an increase in volume, but an increase in complexity. Each additional variable, speed, altitude, direction, adds to the computational burden and decision-making process. Furthermore, the psychological dimension cannot be ignored. Continuous alarms, repeated engagement cycles, and the visibility of incoming fireplay stress not only on civilians but also on the operational tempo of defense units. Even highly automated systems depend on human oversight, and prolonged high-intensity engagement can affect performance. In response to such scenarios, defensive strategies may need to adapt. This could include adjusting interception thresholds, redistributing defensive coverage, or prioritizing critical infrastructure over less sensitive areas. However, each adjustment involves trade-offs. Reducing interception rates to conserve resources may increase the risk of impact, while maintaining full engagement may accelerate resource depletion. At the same time, offensive countermeasures are also part of the equation. Israel's rapid deployment of special units and intensified airstrikes suggests an effort to disrupt the source of incoming attacks rather than relying solely on interception. By targeting launch sites, storage facilities, and command structures, the objective is to reduce the frequency and coordination of future strikes. However, as long as the attacking side retains the ability to launch in waves and from multiple locations, complete suppression remains difficult. This creates a dynamic where defense and offense are continuously interacting, each influencing the other's effectiveness. Ultimately, the recent events highlight a key shift in modern conflict. It is no longer only about how strong a defense system is, but how well it performs under sustained, unpredictable pressure. The real test lies not in a single interception, but in the system's ability to maintain stability when the attack does not stop. As the battlefield intensified, the diplomatic dimension began to expand just as rapidly, turning what might once have been viewed as a border confrontation into a wider regional test. The most immediate external factor was the growing role of the United States, which appeared increasingly involved not only as a strategic observer but also as a political actor seeking to prevent the confrontation from spiraling further. According to the narrative emerging from the region, high-level contacts were being pushed forward in Washington with the participation of representatives connected to both Israel and Lebanon. These efforts suggested that concern was no longer limited to the immediate exchange of fire, but had shifted toward managing the speed and scale of escalation. After more than a month of repeated confrontation, pressure on Washington to move beyond passive monitoring had clearly increased. At the same time, every diplomatic move carried its own risks. In a conflict environment this tense, even the appearance of mediation can alter the calculations of actors on the ground. The moment the United States becomes visibly engaged, the confrontation is no longer interpreted solely through the lens of Israel and Hezbollah. It begins to take on a broader strategic meaning, especially in a region where aligned groups and proxy networks are deeply embedded in the security architecture. This is where the Iran factor becomes unavoidable. From Israel's perspective, Hezbollah is not seen as an isolated military actor, but as one part of a wider regional structure linked to Tehran. That interpretation changes the significance of every strike, every response, and every diplomatic signal. What may appear tactically limited on the surface can quickly be read as part of a much larger balance of power struggle. Meanwhile, reports of possible direct communication channels between Israel and Lebanon added a new and highly sensitive layer to the crisis. Even though Lebanese officials denied that any formal call or negotiation had taken place, the mere suggestion of such a channel was enough to trigger speculation across the region. That reaction was intensified by Hezbollah's own position. The group publicly rejected any arrangement reached without its participation, making it clear that it would not accept being bypassed in decisions affecting the conflict. This stance significantly complicates any diplomatic path forward. It means that even if governments attempt to open space for de-escalation, non-state armed actors with battlefield influence may reject the process unless they are directly involved. As a result, diplomacy becomes more fragile, more contested, and more difficult to separate from events on the ground. At the same time, the regional audience is watching closely. Every airstrike, every counter-operation, and every political statement is being interpreted not only for what it says, but for what it implies about future alignment and confrontation. This is particularly important because the current escalation is no longer seen as purely local. What happens in southern Lebanon and northern Israel now echoes outward across the wider Middle East. The conflict begins to reflect tensions extending through linked fronts, overlapping security concerns, and broader rivalries. From that perspective, the recent wave of attacks becomes more than a military episode. It becomes a diplomatic stress test. It forces regional and international actors to decide whether they will focus on containment, signaling, deterrence, or more direct intervention. And each of those choices carries consequences. Containment may be seen as weakness. Deterrence may trigger counter-deterrence. Intervention may widen the battlefield even further. At the same time, the use of faster and more coordinated attack methods increases the danger of diplomatic lag. When military events unfold in minutes, but political reactions require hours or days, the gap between battlefield reality and diplomatic response becomes a source of instability in itself. This creates a dangerous environment in which a single misread signal or a single overreaction can push the crisis into a far more difficult phase. That is why the current moment is being watched so carefully. The issue is no longer only whether the violence can be contained. The deeper question is whether the diplomatic framework around the conflict is still strong enough to absorb the next shock. As the current phase of confrontation unfolds, analysts increasingly focus on what comes next, rather than what has already happened. The pattern of rapid, high-density attacks has introduced a new variable into an already volatile environment, raising questions about how both sides may adapt in the immediate future. One possible scenario is continued escalation. If the current tempo is maintained or intensified, both sides may expand the scale of their operations. This could involve a broader geographic spread of strikes, increased coordination across different types of weapons, and a higher frequency of engagement cycles. Under such conditions, the risk of miscalculation rises sharply. Each additional wave of attack or counterattack increases the chance that a localized incident could trigger a wider confrontation. In this scenario, the involvement of external actors may also deepen. The United States could move from a primarily diplomatic role toward more visible forms of strategic engagement, depending on how the situation evolves. At the same time, any perceived connection between Hezbollah's actions and Iran's broader regional posture could draw additional attention and response. A second scenario is sustained but controlled tension. In this model, both sides continue to engage in repeated exchanges, but within an implicit boundary that avoids full-scale escalation. Attacks would remain frequent but limited in scope, targeting specific areas without expanding into a wider theater. This pattern would allow each side to signal capability and maintain pressure without crossing a threshold that forces a decisive response. However, maintaining such a balance is inherently unstable. It requires continuous calibration, where each action must be measured against the risk of provoking a larger reaction. Given the speed and complexity of recent attack patterns, sustaining this equilibrium becomes increasingly difficult. A third scenario involves a gradual shift toward de-escalation. This would depend heavily on the effectiveness of diplomatic efforts and the willingness of all involved actors to accept a temporary reduction in operational intensity. Indirect communication channels, even if unofficial, could play a role in shaping this outcome. However, as indicated by recent reactions, such pathways are fragile and contested. Non-state actors with direct influence on the battlefield may resist agreements that do not include their participation. This creates a situation where political decisions and battlefield realities may not always align. At the same time, the introduction of new tactical methods such as rapid, multi-wave strikes adds uncertainty to all three scenarios. Even if political leadership seeks to reduce tensions, the operational momentum on the ground may continue to generate incidents. This disconnect between intent and outcome is one of the most significant risks in the current environment. Another factor to consider is the cumulative effect of repeated engagements. Each cycle of attack and response contributes to a gradual shift in expectations. What was once considered an escalation may become normalized over time. This lowers the threshold for future actions, making it easier for both sides to justify increasingly aggressive behavior. In such a context, the conflict evolves not through a single dramatic event, but through a series of incremental changes that collectively reshape the strategic landscape. Meanwhile, the psychological dimension continues to expand. For civilian populations, repeated alerts and sustained uncertainty create long-term stress. For military planners, the need to operate under constant pressure changes the rhythm of decision-making. Both factors influence how future scenarios may unfold. Ultimately, the trajectory of the conflict will depend not only on military capability, but on how each side interprets the intentions and limits of the other. If actions are read as signals of restraint, space for de-escalation may open. If they are interpreted as signs of preparation for a larger confrontation, the cycle of escalation may accelerate. At this stage, the situation remains fluid, but one point is increasingly clear. The introduction of faster, more coordinated attack methods has compressed the timeline of conflict. Decisions must now be made more quickly, with less margin for error. And in an environment where seconds matter, even a brief misjudgment could carry consequences far beyond the initial event. What began as a rapid, 3-minute strike has now expanded into a much broader narrative about how modern conflicts are evolving. The launch of more than 20 projectiles in such a short time frame was not simply an act of firepower, but a demonstration of timing, coordination, and strategic intent. The sequence of events from the initial impacts to the sustained follow-up waves highlighted a method designed not just to hit targets, but to test the limits of response systems. At the same time, the integration of faster unmanned platforms and multi-layered attack patterns introduced new challenges for existing defense structures. This is no longer a question of whether a system can intercept a single incoming threat. It is about whether it can maintain performance under continuous, unpredictable pressure. Meanwhile, the response from Israel, including intensified airstrikes and ground operations, shows that the confrontation has already moved beyond isolated incidents. It has become a cycle of action and counteraction, where each move is both a reaction and a signal. Beyond the battlefield, the involvement of diplomatic actors and the emergence of possible communication channels indicate that the situation is being closely managed but not fully controlled. The presence of external influences, particularly the broader regional context, means that even limited exchanges carry wider implications. In this environment, the line between tactical events and strategic consequences becomes increasingly blurred. A short burst of activity can reshape perceptions, alter expectations, and influence decisions far beyond its immediate impact zone. What makes the current moment particularly significant is not just what has happened, but what it suggests about the future. The increasing speed of operations, the growing complexity of attack patterns, and the shrinking window for decision-making all point toward a new phase of confrontation. A phase where timing may matter as much as firepower, and where pressure is applied not only through impact, but through persistence. The key question now is not whether this pattern will continue, but how far it will go. Will these methods remain limited to controlled exchanges, or will they evolve into a larger, more unpredictable conflict? And perhaps more importantly, are the current systems military and diplomatic alike prepared for a battlefield that moves this fast? We will continue to follow these developments closely as the situation unfolds. If you found this analysis useful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on the latest global developments. And we would like to hear your perspective. Do you think this type of high-speed, multi-wave attack signals a lasting shift in modern warfare?